all of you coming in here and hanging your souls out on us and see if we can work together. Welcome to the special meeting for the budget on Monday the 22nd at 3:30. And you want to give us a roll call, please, Darlene?
Sure. Councilmember Cervantes? Here. Councilmember Manley? Here. Councilmember Molina?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Hewitt?
Here.
Mayor Davis?
I'm here. Then we've got our city manager, Kubo. I don't know, he looks underdressed. But we'll accept that. And then City Attorney Barrow is not here tonight. City Clerk Gertis, Finance Director Reed, Planning Director Lucia, Public Works Associate Engineer Sakar, something like that. City Engineer Thornton, Fire Chief O'Connell, and we have no sheriff here today. So with that, John, you want to lead us in the pledge? Can I get a motion to accept this thing?
So moved. I move to accept. I'll second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Now, really, this thing is all pretty much straightforward. That I had Mr. Chivante go through it with his fine-tooth comb, and he actually accepted it. So, you know, we ought to be in pretty good shape. Now, have you got something specifically you want to talk about? Okay, when we get there, you let me know. Well, that's, the public comment is,
This is a workshop study session, so there's not regular public comment. There's only public comment on the item itself. So during that item, when you're ready for public comment, that's when he will come and speak.
okay? Thank you. I'll turn this over to the city manager.
Members of the City Council, it is my pleasure to present the proposed fiscal year 23-24 budget, and so we'll get right into the agenda. So we're going to start by giving you a brief update of where we are with fiscal year 22-23, because that will be our starting point for fiscal year 23-24, and we'll dive into the revenues and expenditures of the general fund, and we'll also highlight some of our departmental requests, the major ones. Then I'm going to just do a review of 3 new funds that we're proposing to be created, and then we'll get into the capital improvement plan, and that'll be presented by, most of that will be presented by our city engineer, Mike Thornton. And then some future considerations for the council to consider. And throughout the presentation, we invite discussion and direction. So if you have any questions at any time in the presentation, please feel free to jump in, and we will do our best to address. And we also, obviously, we have staff here as well to answer questions specific to their departments. So let's start with our fiscal 22-23 update. We are projected to finish with revenues over expenditures of about just under $160,000. One-time transfers out are just over 1.1 million, and that will leave us with a projected ending fund balance of just over $8 million. Our contingency reserve is roughly 3.4 million, which would leave us with about $4.6 million in unreserved fund balance. So let's move into 23-24. So here's just an overview based on staff's recommendations, and again, we did present and go into quite a bit of detail with the Finance Committee on these requests. And there were a couple of additional items that are included in this budget that were requested by the committee to be included, so we'll go through those as well. But overall, there's a number of requests that are included in this budget, but we're still looking in good fit financial shape, coming in at about $630,000 on the ongoing column. So that's kind of the focus of, are we going to be able to sustain this budget going on a year-to-year basis? And so that's why we separate out the ongoing from the one-time items, because the one-time items would basically go away in the subsequent fiscal year. But overall, we're looking at just $800,000 operating surplus. The transfers out about $2.2 million. We'll go into detail on what those are later on. And so that leaves us with a net reduction in fund balance of $1.4 million. But again, it's a little deceiving on this when you look at it just the general fund alone, because we have to consider some of those new funds that would be part of our ongoing overall reserve. So we'll go into all the details of what makes up these numbers as we go through this presentation. So we'll start with the revenues. So here are our revenues for our projected revenues for fiscal 23-24. The first two, the two big pieces there, the $4.2 million for property tax and the $1.4 for property tax in lieu of VLF. I will go into a little bit more detail on that, as well as our sales tax revenues. Those are our major sources of revenue, so I want to spend a little bit more time in talking about how those are calculated and how those numbers come to being. So this is just another way. So some people are visual graphically, some people are visual on a table. So I wanted to just present the items in two different ways. But I wanted to also show kind of the progression from our adopted budget to our projected actuals, and then our estimated budget for 23-24. It's kind of a baseline. So there were a number of things that were added during the fiscal 22-23 fiscal year. Obviously, our property tax projections are higher, as well as our sales tax projections. Some of the charges for services are one-time. Those are mostly related to the fire truck acquisition, so we have revenue coming in for that. There is an offsetting expenditure for that amount, and everything else is pretty in line. Planning and engineering charges were a little bit higher than budgeted, again, because of development activity. So that's why if you look at the projected 23 to FY24 budget, you do see a decline, but a lot of that is because of the one-time activity that took place in 22-23. That's why I wanted to show the adopted budget versus the estimated budget for 23-24 to kind of give you a sense of the baseline growth year over year. So I wanted to take a moment to talk about how our property tax distribution comes to the city. So I touched upon this a little bit at the land use workshop, and it's because it is an important aspect as to where people's tax monies go, because that's obviously a big part of what they pay as their property tax. Prop 13 was passed in 1978, and that's really was kind of a benchmark of where these revenues got set. So pre-Prop 13, basically every jurisdiction, whether it's a city, the county, school district, special district, they set their own tax rates, and then the assessor would assess value or assess properties on an annual basis. And actually, in a lot of states, that still is what happens today. Well, with Prop 13, it did three major things. It limited the property tax rate to 1% of assessed value overall. So each jurisdiction no longer set their own property tax rate. It actually set it at an overall 1% rate. The second thing it did is it rolled back assessments to the assessed values to the 1975-76 level, and this was passed again in 1978. And the third thing it did was it limited growth of assessed value to 2% a year, and it was only reset when the property changed hands. So when you sell a property, it's reset to that sales value, and then it increases only up to 2%. There are circumstances where it actually goes up less than 2% because of CPI. So I think 2 years ago, for example, was a good example of that. When we had really low inflation, the assessed value actually increased by less than 2%. So this had an effect on local government finances, and it also had an effect on state finances. It lowered the amount of property tax that was being paid, therefore that lowered property tax revenue. But it also increased income taxes to the state, because the deduction for property taxes went down. So in response, the state had this windfall and recognized that local governments had had a lot of their revenue cut, so they passed AB 8. And what that did, it defined the distribution of property tax dollars based on their pre-Prop 13 proportional share. So if whatever your jurisdiction collected relative to the total of property tax paid in any tax rate area, that's the amount of property tax that jurisdiction would get, that 1%. So that's where this dollar came from. This is the distribution that was set back at that time. So obviously, for the city of Calimesa, that was before our incorporation. So the two parts on the left side, 9% and the 20% that are outlined, that is the city's portion. That went to the county before. And then when we incorporated, it got transferred. Another piece was back in 1988 with the passage of Prop 98. That established minimum guaranteed funding for school funding, both K through 12 and community college funding. And so the state would have to make up any shortfall in that revenue that did not come from property taxes, which is the primary source of revenue for schools. So what ended up happening is that in the early 90s, when there was a state budget shortfall and they had to make this minimum to school funding, what they did was they took some of the monies from other jurisdictions, non-school jurisdictions. So you see on this slide, you see obviously the city's general fund, you see the county's general fund, Riverside County agencies, San Gregorio Pass Water Agency, YVWD, all these agencies shifted some of their revenue to that last column, which is called ERAF, which is the Education Revenue Augmentation Fund. And there were several shifts that happened that basically put more monies to the school districts, therefore lowering the state's Prop 98 payment that they had to make to get to the guaranteed funding. So this shifted money away from cities, and this occurred, like I said, several times until Prop 1A in 2004 got passed. It basically said the state needs to stop taking money away from local governments to balance their budget. So that was a constitutional amendment that basically ended that. And at around the same time, the vehicle license fee was lowered, and that was a local revenue source. So what the state did was they made a dollar-for-dollar swap with property tax, and that came from the ERAF pot. So the ERAF grew throughout the 90s and early 2000s, and now a lot of that money is being shifted back to the various agencies through our VLF guarantee. So that actually worked out better for the cities because now it grows with property tax. So if we had stuck with VLF, our actual VLF revenue would be less than if we had just stayed with the VLF. With property tax, we're actually getting more revenue. So it actually worked out for us. And then finally, another way that the state lowered its Prop 98 burden was to eliminate redevelopment agencies. So a lot of that money then started shifting back to the schools, therefore it lowered the state's benefit, and lo and behold, about 4 or 5 years after that, the state had a huge surplus. That was more than just a coincidence. But I thought it was just important to understand how people's property tax dollars, it doesn't just all come to the city, it goes to a number of agencies, and this is just one example. So for the school district, for example, in the northern part of the city, it goes to Yucaipa Calimesa Joint Unified School District. In the southern part of the city, it goes to Beaumont Unified School District. It depends on where you are within the boundaries. So it's not like every single person's property taxes is distributed exactly the same. This is just kind of a cross-section of that distribution. So as you see in the trends, because of one of the effects Prop 13 does have on local governments is that it does make property tax distribution or property tax growth very, very steady. And so when you have a decline in the economy, you won't see it affect property tax as much, because if you have, in our city, we've had a lot of growth in the last 5 years. It could have more of an effect, but the older established parts of Calimesa, a downturn in the economy is not necessarily going to affect their property tax, because your property tax base is probably much lower than your market value, even if your market value drops. So But you can see from this, you can kind of tell when development happened from this graph. You can see the big bump between 1920 and 2021, and then again from 2022, that was, and even into 23, that was the development of JP Ranch and phase 1 of Summerwind. And those developments are now built out. We haven't had much development activity, and that's why you're seeing the growth in 23, 24 has kind of slowed down a little bit. So we only have 2% built into that number. Looking at sales tax, so this is the distribution of sales tax. Most of it goes to the state. We get 1%. That 1% was established by the state legislature back in 1955. That's called the Bradley-Burns 1% sales tax. Every city gets that. If you're an unincorporated county, it goes to the county. And then you see the Measure A, we're considered what's called a self-help county, which means that we've passed a sales tax measure to fund transportation projects, and we do get a portion of that back into our city at about $300,000 to $275,000, $300,000 or less per year is what we get, and that goes into a special fund, its own fund, and can only be spent for transportation purposes. So I wanted to take a look at some of the major categories. So this is sales tax for calendar year 2022. As you can see, I wanted to kind of put the state's distribution next to it just to kind of see how it stacks up. Now, as you can see, about 57% of our property tax, or sales tax, comes from fuel and service stations and restaurants and hotels. What that indicates is that, one of the things that we're close to a major interstate, and we have gas stations that are in close proximity to it. That is still very much what drives our sales tax. It's just a reality because our population is still low. As we grow, I expect this to shift. But what this does also, it shows us where our opportunities are to grow. Where can we start, catching up to and trying to get our pie to more closely emulate the state's pie, right? And it's not going to be just growth in our city. It's going to be growth in the region because major retailers are going to look at how many people live within a certain radius and what the income level is within that certain radius. Those are two factors that we compete with, which is why when we do see people talk about, well, there's so much more shopping in Redlands. Well, Redlands is next to Loma Linda and San Bernardino, and Redlands itself has 60,000 people. Yucaipa is even next to it. So they have, within their radius, they have about 300,000 people, whereas in that same radius here, we probably have between 100 and 150,000. That will continue to grow, and as it continues to grow, there'll be opportunities for us to get those major retailers in. So we want to make sure that we are on the forefront of getting to those businesses before our neighboring cities do. So that is part of our economic development effort. But it does show here where we have an opportunity to grow as a city. And I do have some good news on that front. We've already done some of that. For example, the marketplace at Calimesa produced $322,000 in sales tax in calendar year 22 alone. And that's up from $121,000 in 2021. So as the stores opened, we saw that that sales tax increase. So we expect that to happen when the Commons comes online, and of course when Oak Valley Town Center. That'll make a big shift in this pie, I predict. And you can kind of see from our top 25 sales tax producers, you kind of see that pattern that we saw on that previous slide of that pie. So a lot of the businesses on this list are the fuel and service stations, the restaurants, and about almost 87% of our total point of sales tax, that's all of our sales tax not counting our county pool contributions, we're in the top 25. For a city our size, that's expected. And again, this will lower as time goes on, unless we get a really major retailer or other type of business that produces a lot of sales tax and takes up a lot of that percentage. This percentage could still end up being high, but it's not being driven by any one of these necessarily. So we're still protected from kind of, if this one business fails, we're screwed. I've seen some other cities that have relied on one sales tax producer for about 60 to, even as high as 75% of their sales tax revenue. So we're not in that boat, so that's also good news, is that even though they're in these couple of categories, we still have some diversity because the sales are pretty spread out between these 25. And by the way, this is the only way we can list them. They're listed in alphabetical order because of confidentiality rules for the state. We're not allowed to disclose, how much comes from each of these businesses and what rank they are within that. So we just show the top 25 in alphabetical order. Yeah, yeah. And that would be both locations. You notice 7-Eleven is listed twice, Jack in the Box is listed twice because they have 2 different sales permits, but Stater Brothers is only listed once, even though they have 2 locations because they're only under 1 permit. So again, looking at the sales tax trends, this is where it does get a little more volatile. You don't see that steady, incline like you saw with property tax. You see a little bit of a dip in 20 that was related to the pandemic, but then we've seen growth since then. But then again, remember 36% comes from fuel and service sales. So obviously, when our revenue with it, but now they're predicted to at least flatten out, which is why we're seeing the number for 23-24 be flat as well. So a couple of other revenue highlights. Remember there was that ongoing and the recurring and then the one-time revenue slide. 2 of those major items here are for building and safety charges and planning and engineering charges. Those are for and pay those related fees. And on the expense side, you're going to see a one-time expense related to those as well, because we pay for a lot of those through Charles Abbott. So the revenue comes in, and then we pay them for the services that are rendered. Include also under charges for services, we have an increase in recurring from the public CFD. We're increasing that contribution by $125,000. And then we have a one-time contribution from the CFD. The fund balance was such that we could make a contribution, aid the cities to basically kind of reimburse the city for some of its costs related to the implementation program. So now we're going to take a look at the fiscal year 23-24 proposed expenditures. I do want to spend a little time talking about our police and fire budgets. The 2 combined make up about 61% of our budget. In addition to the $2.5 million shown here for police, for the sheriff's department, we also spent an additional $164,000 from our supplemental law enforcement safety fund for a total of about $2.7 million. I do want to kind of clarify what police staffing is. So we hear a lot of people talk about 1 deputy for every 24, that's patrolling. But the rate we pay is about $211 per hour. And so that obviously includes some more services besides just a deputy, right? Because a deputy does not cost $200. So I do want to talk about some of the services that our sheriff's department provides. It calculates out that we have 5.63 full-time equivalent positions, patrol positions. That includes our POP officer. About 2.5 full-time equivalent sworn support positions for a total of 8.13 FTEs. And then we also have 2.88 classified positions. Those are administrative folks, our community services officer. So that gives us a total of 11 FTE sheriff's positions. There's about 50 staff at the Cabazon Sheriff Station, and about 11 of those are paid for by Calimesa. So that's the service level that we get. And I did get some stats as well, just so for the council's benefit. Our patrol FTEs per thousand residents is 0.54. The median for all contract cities is 0.57, so we're just below that. Our police budget as a percent of our general fund is 28%. The median for contract cities is also 28%. Calls per 1,000 residents is 342. That was in calendar year 2022. The median was 343. Priority 1 calls per 1,000 residents was 8.8, and the median was 8.9. And finally, calls per sworn officer. I wanted to look at this metric to see are our patrol being more taxed relative to other cities, contract cities, and the calls per sworn officer were 757 and the median was 763. So we're below the median on that as well. So I just wanted to put those stats out there because when we look at the budget, we're trying to think about what we need to, propose and not propose. We have to look at data points, right? And so that's why, I wanted to pull some of these data points to look at those things. I think that in an ideal world, every single city would want to get more officers on the street. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. But you have to do it within what your budget allows you to do. The other thing I would point out is, if there is either a perceived or a real increase in crime happening, unfortunately, Calimesa is not alone, because if Calimesa was alone in that, maybe there is something we could do more about it. This is a trend we're seeing statewide, and we've seen this trend happening over the last 5 or 6 years as a result of legislation and propositions like Prop 47, Prop 57, AB 109. Those have had real impacts on our officers, and it does make their jobs more difficult as well. And so it does lead to more crime because there's less consequence for certain crimes. I see, I follow social media in other cities as well, and they're getting the same, feedback, unfortunately. And again, I don't think there's a city out there that would not want to fix that. But again, it's something that has to be, you have to balance the budget with the resources that you can request as a result of that.
Can I just clarify something? I know that some people have said that we only have one officer, which is not true, correct? So we do have, you said 11 or something at our disposal if something
11
happens or here?
between support and classified positions, yeah.
So if something happens, you can call, how many people will show up?
100. If he needed it, yeah.
Yeah, we have access to all the special units as well, as needed, at a moment's notice. That is the advantage of contracting with the Sheriff's Department, is that you do have access to all of their resources.
Yeah, and let the record show that Lieutenant Olson did come in, shortly after we started, but didn't get recognized. Thank you for being here. Okay.
But we have our POP officer. I just want to make this very clear
Yes.
so everybody knows that. We do have officers. It's not like we just have one that just hangs around. We have several that come around. And I see them, around all the time, but, I know other people are calling for more police patrol. So, like you said, I think it's in every city. It's not just ours, unfortunately. So.
Yeah.
Can I add a comment as well? I live up against undeveloped land, and I've seen your officers on ATVs going through the undeveloped land because we tend to have people go in there and do fire rockets and other illegal things. And when the need arises, our department is there on ATVs. So we do have a lot of resources. So that should be assuring for our community. So thank you for that.
I had a question on that same topic. As you mentioned, the contract that we have is for translates to 5.6 deputies, basically what we pay for our roughly 11,000
Right.
people. So we have 24 hours. We're paying for per hour 24 hours a day, which is 4.6, and then we have our POP officer. One thing I wasn't clear on as far as like what options we were as far as the contract goes. If we're gonna increase, like what increments could we increase by? So we pay for 24 hours a day. Can it be 26 or 30, or how would that make sense as far as your staffing goes, or what options do we have for increasing if we wanted to add to that?
That would be something I'd have to get back to council on. I've had those discussions with Dr. Calimesa.
As far as just the patrol shifts go, are they on like 12-hour shift, or how is that structured?
Yeah, patrol deputies are on 12-hour shifts.
Okay.
Community service officers are on 10-hour shifts.
And there's, so these work day shift and night shift? That's no swing shift or anything? Okay. Do you know, is there any like flexibility as far as shifts goes or hours worked, or is that just like per your contract, that's how it's structured for your deputies? Okay. I think that's all I had, thank you.
Okay. And I think that's a good question, because as our community grows, and we recognize, staff recognizes certainly that we're going to have to grow with it. And so, there's been a focus on the fire department, and in our budget we do have some requests for that. But with the proposed positions in the fire department, we're basically set. I think that it basically completes our transition, and it fills all our positions, required positions, with full-time employees. That was the goal of this last kind of push. So that would only grow as with growth in the city. And I think that, don't want to speak out of turn with the chief here, but I think that that'll sustain us for a little while in terms of additional population growth, right? But I think with police services, it's going to have to be more incremental than that. And I do envision a time where this will flip, and that your blue section will be bigger than your red section at some point. Because remember, we do have admin in the 3.1 million as well, and you're not going to have to necessarily increase your admin as the city grows. You're still going to add. You're still going to have your 3 BCs. You're going to only have 1 chief, the office of the fire chief, and so where your grow is, you're going to grow more at the staff level versus at the admin level. So your incremental growth will be lower, whereas with the contract, the contract rate is the contract rate, and so we do see a situation where one will surpass the other. And if you look at populations in cities of our size, this is similar of what you'd see in those other cities. And as you look at populations that grow, that's where you see that flip happen. And I would anticipate that would happen in the city of Calimesa as well.
Actually, I had another, follow-up to
Yeah,
that
yeah,
topic
absolutely.
here. Just as you mentioned some of the stats we had, and looking at the calls for service over, I think, over the last 3 years. So just like the fire department, it's kind of gone up each year as far as total calls for service.
Yes.
And then response times that I have for the sheriff's departments, obviously, in general, kind of grown a little bit
Yes.
as calls for service has gone up. But I don't know what information we would have access to, but I was just curious to try to better understand as far as the demand goes, and as far as the workload goes for them. If I was trying to understand the CSO, or for the supplemental law enforcement that we have, like the type or amount of work that they have. So like as far as how many crime reports are being generated per year, calls for service is one thing, but trying to understand as far as how many actual crime reports are being done, and then specifically looking at the CSO, like how many actual reports are they having to take, like how useful or beneficial is that, how much load is that taking off of the deputies, as far as trying to understand the benefit and cost savings of that specific position.
Right.
And then I know they only work so many hours, they only have 1 of them, so they only cover certain hours during the day. So I don't know if that was just more, I guess, a request.
Okay,
if
yeah,
that
because
was,
I don't have that. I was going to say. I
yeah,
don't
it's
have
not that you would have
information, yeah.
that information off the top of anyone's head, but I was just interested if that was information that we could have, just to try to better understand as far as their needs and demand on all of everything that they're doing.
Right,
To better
right.
grasp everything.
Lieutenant, that's something you guys can provide to us, right? Okay, thank you. Yeah, we'll get that for you.
Thank you.
And then I just wanted to point out one more thing, under community development and engineering, specifically planning for community development. Most of that, it's kind of a deceitful to look at the number here, because you're going to have projects that are going to be charged out, like $85,000 for engineering. We actually spend, quite a bit more than that, but a lot of that gets absorbed through CIP projects, for example. And then on the planning side, a significant amount of time is charged to development projects as well, because that's where they're spending a lot of their time. And that'll actually be the subject of one of our requests that we're going to talk about later. Any other questions on the expenditures? On the least the breakdown of the expenditures? I'm going to go into the actual requests on the next slides here. All right. So starting with our one-time general fund requests, the city clerk's office is requesting to do its first ever document destruction. Yeza and Darlene have been doing a lot of work out at our storage to try to get things cleaned up and get ready for this. And this is just for records that aren't required to be kept. So obviously the more documents we have, the more storage space it's taking up and costs are incurred. And so so that's the request there. Under community development, I had mentioned the revenue that we had for planning and engineering, for building safety and fire prevention. So these are the offsetting costs associated with those revenues. And then there's a request for office furniture. That's also partially based on one of the personnel requests that we have that I'll present later. The animal control spay and neuter mobile clinic is part of our new contract with the County of Riverside, and that's a one-time cost. And then in the fire department, we have several requests, the biggest of which is the second set of turnouts. So that way all of our firefighters will have a second set in case they do use them on an incident. They can go out and get decontaminated and still have a second set ready and available for them to use. And then finally, the $4,000 for community partnerships, that is specific to the request from the Calimesa Cultural and Performing Arts Association. We're putting this in as a one-time cost, so we have the $4,000 that we normally have for them. This is an addition to that, so for the total of $8,000, we're putting this as a one-time cost so that the city council can again consider that. It just makes kind of more of a reference point for us to kind of see how it goes and see how that helps them, and if the council wants to do it again next year, they would approve it again through the budget process again. So that's why we included it this way. And so the total for our general fund proposed expenditures is $359,225. So going into our major general fund recurring expenditures, first the staff I'm requesting a cost of living adjustment. We originally did not provide a percentage to the finance committee. We discussed this item to kind of get a feel of what would be, number one, where we'd be comfortable with, and number two, so when we presented the budget, we did not include this 5%, so we added the 5% in there in the budget that's being presented to you today for that cost of $125,000. So this is for all staff, both it's city hall staff and fire staff, except for the city manager. The second request is a health benefit increase of $50 a month for a total of $1,000 a month, but to make it effective January 1st, 2024, rather than at the beginning of the fiscal year, to correspond with when health benefit increases usually take place. So we're just trying to match up the health increases to that increase in the benefit. So the cost for 6 months is $11,000, and the full year cost is $22,000. The next request is an increase in the salary range for the fire chief. Right now, he is currently below all of our department heads, and so I'm recommending that we bring his salary range up to that, commensurate with the deputy city manager, in recognition of the span of control. And because in addition to fire, he also is one of our liaisons for public works, because right now we have our public works director is a contractor, so we want to have a city staff person that kind of helps oversee that, so he helps in that role as well. And just in recognition the complexity and difficulty of the job. Our current accounting tech to an accountant, to recognition of additional responsibilities that the position has been taking not only just on the finance side, but also IT, and there's different things that position is doing to kind of help things work at City Hall. And this would also update the range of the accountant to maintain consistency with other entry-level professional positions within the city. So it's an internal equity adjustment rather than a market equity adjustment. So I just want to make that clarification. Just going to be one range point from 26 to 27. In addition, this is just more of a cost shifting. There's some increases here, but a lot of it is related to shifts in cost from the successor agency to the general fund, because we did our last and final ROPS that the council and successor agency board approved, and so a lot of the admin costs go away from that, so we had to move it back to the general fund, and so we're also just shifting some costs into the general fund. It also accounts for increases in the CalPERS contribution rate and anticipated merit increases throughout the year. So that is also included in the budgetary figures you're seeing in the budget today. And that is across all departments. Now these are additional staffing requests. The first one is in finance, the addition of a senior accountant. We are continuing to grow and getting more complex. We've added a lot of CFDs and we'll be continuing to add more. The administration of that is very time consuming. And so right now we only have 2 positions in finance. And so in order to meet internal controls, we've had a lot of other positions throughout the city taking on some finance roles in order to maintain those internal controls. So this will allow us to bring some of that stuff back into the finance fold and allow our other positions to work on their core competencies rather than having to focus on finance things. But in addition, for better succession planning and for whatever reason, if someone is unable to work or they leave or something like that, being left with only one person in a department, especially a department that's as important as finances, could leave us in a very vicarious situation. So it's for all those reasons that we're recommending this. But along with that, we would also recommend the elimination of the financial consultant contract that we currently have with Duluth Alwis. So we will be discontinuing that contract. So the net cost for this position is $62,833. In community development, we are proposing to add a planning technician. After discussion with the finance committee, we have 2 options that we're presenting to you today, and I'd like to get feedback from the council on this. The first option, which is what the staff's recommendation was, is to add the full-time planning technician 1 at a net cost of $21,434. Right now, we do have a planning consultant budget of $60,000 that we would eliminate with the approval of this position. And again, there's a lot of the reasons that I talked about with finance kind of apply to the planning position as well. Having a third person in the fold would allow for continuity and staff, but also I think it'll allow us to do some more focus on right now we do a lot of focus on current planning, so while we're working on projects, things like that, and I would like the planning director to have be able to spend more time on advanced planning. So for example, the housing element, I guess, Kelly, has probably been kind of like a side project almost, even though it's a huge project, it's been treated as a side project. So, that's just one example, but we don't have a lot of resources and a lot of time to do advanced planning. So it would allow Kelly to shift some work down to Celine, and then Celine not have to work the counter as much. The other thing that we see it doing is it'll give us an opportunity to increase our hours at the counter. Right now, our hours are only 8 to noon, and with this, I would also see that we increase our hours at the counter so we can provide better customer service. So sometimes we have people come in the early afternoon and ask, we want to see planning. Oh, it's already closed. So being able to provide additional customer service is also part of this ask. But the alternative option to that would be to use the planning consultant budget to maybe use that to bring in a contractor for counter hours. Obviously, through a professional firm, the hourly cost is probably a little bit higher. So with the $60,000, you'd probably get about 800 hours of service for that. If you were to put it at the full, the proposed cost of the planning tech, which is 81,434, that probably gets you to about 1,080 hours, which is about a half-time person, because a full-time person is 2,080 hours. So I want to pause there and maybe have the council maybe discuss the two options, and if you have any questions for myself or Kelly, you can we'll be certainly happy to answer those.
I just had a couple questions on the finance topic.
Yes.
So, as far as what is it that the consultant actually, what is their main functions currently?
I'm going to have Celeste answer that question.
Commissioner Manley. So currently, the financial consultant has served in an advisory capacity and has provided the opportunity to review and prepare state grants, review journal entries, and prepare quarterly reports, and provides approximately 450 service hours a year, supplementing the finance functions and allowing opportunity for me to work on grants and do budget management and so forth. He has been very instrumental in providing support for a continuity of service as we transitioned with my position. So the financial consultant has been effectively a second set of eyes and been providing quite a bit of review.
Okay. And then what are these functions that the other departments are kind of having to do currently, that the parts that would be like reabsorbed back into finance, and then like how much, if you did reabsorb that back into finance, like how much savings would that, time savings would that create for the other departments?
So currently we have a distributed function to assist with internal control processes and procedures. So we have our administrative assistants assist and prepare with cash receipting, and we have our senior city clerk and senior administrative assistant provide us with a data entry element. Our deputy city clerk, did I get her title right, Darlene? She provides a lot of comprehensive analysis and reporting and pulling together documentation for all of the city's credit cards, which is a significant function and a very important internal control. And then we also have members of individual departments managing their own payables and invoicing, and specifically with respect to revenue collection and invoicing, a lot of that is now managed on secondary Excel spreadsheets that are managed within each respective department. So we're hoping to utilize more of our software function and bring that in a little bit in and closer and tighter to finance, so we can provide better trending reports, better follow-up opportunities, and review of invoices and revenue collection.
Okay. And how much, I know it's kind of just an estimate as far as like how much time would that save all these other departments by taking away all their responsibilities to individually do that?
So I apologize, I don't have the exact figures, but I believe for the finance department we have 2.17 full-time equivalents allocated to the department, and so that would be allocated and given back to the administrative side and deputy city clerk purposes. And then also we don't have any of planning currently allocated to the finance department, so we're hoping to alleviate some of the revenue tracking and some of the invoicing and so forth from planning. So that is an off expense that is not currently reflected as a function of the finance department, but that the finance department would absorb to free up planning to provide more of their deeper function and what their core competency is, Will referred.
Thank you.
I can kick off a little bit of discussion with respect to the community development in addition of the planning technician. If I remember from our conversation in the finance committee meeting, we were sort of going back and forth on some of the pros and the cons of these different options. And of course the pro of option 2 would be the cost savings, but the pro of option 1 would be having a full-time person in-house who would have a much broader job description and can contribute more to the city than just, you know, counter hours and so forth. And so we were kind of going back and forth with that, but I think we ended with wanting to also hear from our planning director with respect to their opinion on the pros and cons of these two options.
Thank you so much for the question. So I'll just say option one is vastly preferred for a continuity perspective. So planning in general as a discipline is not easily transferable jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So during various points in time, including you know, bouts of illness or maternity, we have had part-time help at our counter. And it's just not as effective as having somebody, I'll just say, kind of in the trenches. There's a lot happening in our city, and a lot of it is very nuanced and very complicated. So to drop somebody in a couple times a week, potentially, and to have them give a few hours for Calimesa, and maybe a few hours for Ontario, maybe a few hours for another city, they don't understand all of the issues that Calimesa is facing, and they don't understand the nuanced policy direction that it really takes to give good counter service and to help implement some of the broader programs and policies that we're hoping to implement.
Thank you for sharing that. So I don't know what others think, but I'm inclined to support option one.
Any other questions? I'm going to ask mine then. So this net cost, $62,833, full cost of position. Okay, full cost of position. What does that include? Does that include the PERS and everything?
Yes, yeah, fully burdened, all the roll-up costs, yes.
And these are full-time positions, correct?
Correct.
All right, thank you.
I only had one comment, and that was we're growing, and the fact that we have dedicated staff versus temporary staff is better to prepare us for growth. I know our city is so small, every department wears many hats, and I see that as a plus for the future. You know, you're kind of like cross-training employees, and they're full-time employees. So I'm really supportive of option one for that reason.
I would just, option one as well for me.
I have a scenario.
Sure.
Okay, say we hire these people and we have a dip in, you know, our economy, things take a dive, you know, what happens then? I mean, what if we can't afford to keep them on? What happens?
So that's a good question. And that will be when we look at those kind of things, when that happens, I mean, the more staff you have, the more it is more difficult to make that shift. I think that's kind of what you're alluding to. I will say that especially on the planning side, another thing that I didn't mention that I would like Kelly to help out with more is I think community development and economic development are very closely tied, right? Because you can really do a lot with land use recommendations and things like that to maximize how much revenue can come into the city to provide services. So that's another component that I would see, especially if there was a slowdown, and I would shift her time to that as well if there was less counter activity. I think in terms of finance, unfortunately, that seems to be the place that gets cut the first when economic downturns happen, and that would not be my recommendation, because that's usually when you need them the most, because you're trying to have someone that understands the budget inside and out and can really make good solid recommendations, and I think that strong finance people can make the difference in getting through it and not getting through it, because there's ways and techniques to be able to get through things that only they can provide. So I think in these scenarios, I think there's definitely going to be stuff to do, even though in that time. The other nice thing that we have working for us right now is that we are very healthy financially, especially with the bottom line, right? Even our surplus for the current year. So we have a structural surplus on top of a very solid fund balance. And so, and it's that way by design. So we wanted to make sure that we presented a budget that not only met the needs for us to continue to serve the community well, but also give us enough wiggle room that we would be able to withstand a downturn without having to take drastic measures.
Let me also just reiterate that, I want to echo what Will said, but also the net cost is only $21,434 for the additional planning technician, and the amount of value I think that they're going to bring to the city for that amount of difference in resources is way beyond that. I mean, the continuity, the utility value, the taking things off of Kelly's shoulders and providing more customer service. I mean, there's just, the list goes on. And so for such a small, I think, amount of money, we can really make a tremendous difference. But,
I see what you're saying. I kind of like looking at the full cost, though. I'm a little bit more conservative that way.
But the net cost is really all the additional funds for that position that we should be looking at. I understand we're looking at the full cost, but we're already paying the $60,000.
Any thoughts from anybody else?
Well, I mean, I had another question, and that
Yes.
is, in the two disciplines, finance and planning, do we still look at or consider recruiting interns from the schools in those two disciplines to help out with, I know we've done it in the past.
Well, I mean, we're seeing
I know,
we're seeing a product of it
I
right here.
know, I know, so I'm
Um,
asking if that's, if there are funds for that, or do interns get paid, or it's just an experience process?
So maybe Mayor Pro Tem, you can give an update on that. I know that we were using the WR crop program, and it sounds like that's
fellowship
maybe going, yeah, the
program is
fellowship going
still-
away.
Still going.
Still going, yeah.
Right now, until it runs out of money.
Right, so,
Because the HERO program, I believe, was the one that was financing all that, and
right.
it's no more, so.
Yay.
But that
So
doesn't
they
mean,
are looking at other options. I suggested fundraising for it, you know, when we have our big general assembly, why don't you say, hey, it's in danger of losing your fellowship program, any donations would help, you know, so I think they're thinking about that, and I feel like, you know, let's don't take it out of our pocket, let's see how many people actually want it.
right. And there's also opportunities to work with the colleges as well, colleges, universities. We can reach out and utilize them for interns as well.
Right.
It definitely is an option that we can bring in. You know, one challenge we do have here at City Hall is space, right? So, you know, what we're proposing, we can still house, but we're getting close to that point where we can't. So even if we had the revenue or the funds to be able to fund additional positions, we may not have the space to do it. We did add the annex, which helped a lot, and has made a big difference. But eventually that will probably not be enough either. So that is also a challenge that we will have in the future.
I think, you know, it's, I have reservations also, but I think we've reached a point to where everybody has taken on 5 hats, and it's time to pull some of the hats off and give them time to breathe. You know, and I've been in a position to where I got burnt out working too much. You know, not that I feel you all work too much. I like that. You know, and it's more hands-on. You know, I like the fact that if we had somebody on the counter that actually cared about Calimesa, and this is something I really promote. I want people to not show what they want. I want them to show what Calimesa wants. You know, and it's hard to get with a part-time person walking in and out. You know, and it can be a lot of irritation. So it's I feel that we can. I don't like spending money, and the only reason we have any money is because we haven't. But I guess it's time to maybe open up the drawer a little bit and pull a few dollars out and see if we can make it work. But we're going to have to watch just how it's paid for. We have a lot of costs coming in. It's the fire department. You know, I don't think their costs, they're gonna go down because we're set up for growth already. These guys over here, no, I'm worried about them. But that's what our people are demanding, is more protection. And I think they're doing a fantastic job right now. So it's, I'll roll with it right now.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the input. Thank you very much. Okay, let's move on to fire. Speaking of fire, couple of requests here. Currently, right now, we have 2 battalion chiefs that are basically running a 72 on, 72 off schedule. So our normal schedule is 48 on, it's a 48-96. So you work 2 days, 4 days, and then you have 4 days off. So with that, with working 72 on, 72 off, we are incurring some additional overtime costs. So we're recommending to add the 3rd battalion chief. Occasionally, our fire chief does fill in as on the BC shift, but I'd rather pull him away from that and allow him to focus fully on his duties as chief, because that's very important. So we do anticipate some overtime savings as a result of that request. So the net cost is about $60,000. And I think that the overtime savings, we wanted to make sure we were conservative on that. It could end up being higher, but we didn't want to set the bar too high on that. And then the second request for the fire department is to add 3 apparatus engineers. So right now we're running a 3-person engine and a 2-person patrol squad, which is for medical. And this would add, but out of those 3 on the engine, 1 is being filled by a reserve or by a force hire. So every time, if we don't have a reserve available, which has been a challenge at times, because our full reserve bench is 14, and we've been down to as low as 4, correct? And so if we can't get a reserve to fill that 5th seat, which is part of our actual operation, we do incur overtime on that. So we do anticipate there will be overtime savings, but we're not factoring those in until we see what that actually produces. We didn't want to include any provision for savings of overtime. So again, we wanted to present a very conservative number to make sure that we didn't go over budget. So the full cost for those 3, because obviously you have to fill 3 shifts for that 1 position, is the full cost is $252,000. But with the reduction of we would still have the reserve program, but we'd only be using them as true reserves, either as a 4th seat or on an as-needed basis to fill a seat that is maybe someone's out, vacation, sick, something like that. But we do anticipate a reduction in the reserve program as a result. So the net cost is going to be about $224,082 on that. Any questions on those requests?
Real quick, Will. So 2 questions. First, so our projected budget for fiscal year 23-24 of fire of $3.15 million, is that taking these into consideration?
Yes, it's
Okay,
including,
that's what I-
everything that is being presented is included in the budget.
Is
Yes.
included that.
Yes.
So, and then my second question, I remember, I think this would be a benefit for the other council members. We were discussing in the finance committee meeting, was brought to our attention that using some of the reserves as an engineer is sort of out of compliance. And I was wanting our fire chief to maybe elaborate on that. If I remember the point correctly, it's using the reserves in a role that they shouldn't be used in, and that could come back on the city in a kind of way. Am I remembering that discussion correctly?
I don't know if I would characterize it that way.
Okay.
Because
that
I mean, I
discussion?
think they're definitely, they're able to fill the seat. It's just a matter of making sure that, we're in year 6 of the fire department, and so we wanted to make sure that the staffing is, we want to use the reserves as truly as reserves, right? Rather than filling a seat that would otherwise.
So they can be used as an engineer.
As an engineer, no. Maybe I can have
Yeah,
the
so-
fire
so,
chief clarify on that.
Yeah, I have some confusion on this.
Yes, council member. So a couple of different things. We do not use reserves as engineers.
Okay.
We're asking for those added engineer positions to fully staff a municipal fire model with a captain, a fire apparatus engineer, and then when we turn a firefighter paramedic. Currently, the reserves fill that third spot, and there's not a lot of reliability there. We truly have to use them in a training capacity, and that presents some challenges in filling that seat. Adding the engineer's position does several things for us, but it's also it's going to give us reliability in having that full-time firefighter in that seat.
I see.
And not the engineer. The engineer position is created. Council knows that we're adding paramedics and that we're soon to receive a ladder truck. And that apparatus engineer position guarantees a certified operator with roles and responsibilities to allow us to go to a true full service all hazards type of department.
Right.
And I just want to add in on the reserves too. It's just the reliability is there because the turnover is very, very great, right? Because they're usually in training, and so a lot of times they may either go we use it as a recruiting tool to get them to find full-time firefighters, but a lot of times they may go do other things, or they're not as committed. So it does become more difficult to keep those spots filled and to actually call on them when we need them.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for the clarification. That helped to alleviate my misunderstandings and help me understand the way it functions. Appreciate it.
Had a couple of questions on that.
Yes.
Just to confirm on, so our model is still the same. We're gonna have 3 on the engine, 2 on the patrol. As far as the new positions goes, the current model doesn't change at all.
No, it does. What is changing is basically we're reliant on the reserve program right now for that 5th body. If we don't have that 5th body, I cannot make reserves come to work. They can't. They're an at-will intern reserve, and if they call off, and they do, I'm scrambling, and my guys are scrambling to fill that 5th position, which we're incurring, I believe, a significant amount of overtime making sure we have that 5th position filled. So with this model, we add the engineer's position, and then we go from what is referred to as 4-0 staffing to the shifts will be 5-0. So we will have a guarantee of 3 bodies on the engine and 2 full-time bodies on the patrol.
Okay. And as far as the battalion chief goes, so right now they're 72 on, 72 off. How would that coverage change with the added position?
So when council, city manager appointed me as the fire chief, I rose up from the ranks. I was a battalion chief, and our duty schedule is 4896. And so the 4896, we had 2 battalion chiefs, and there's battalion coverage, which are your ops guys, the guys that we're out having them out supervise, like a patrol watch commander for the police department. They're out supervising and running incidents. We're also required to have a duty chief, so there's a little duality there. So you have a battalion chief covering operations, and we have an administrative, a chief, or at the time a deputy chief. So a couple of things happen. So we have 2 battalion chiefs right now covering the 4896. They're forced hired that 3rd day every week, so they're basically filling the absence of that 3rd position, and we're incurring overtime for that weekly. So the addition of that 3rd position gives us reliability operationally, and then I think we'll see some financial relief in terms of overtime savings.
And I would also add potential for burnout, because that's a really long shift.
So you said 4896. That's their 48 on, and
They're
then they're
48
off.
on.
Off.
They're supposed to work 2 days on, have 4 days off. Right now they're working 3 days on, 3 days off. It's a challenge operationally. If one of them calls off, then we're working 4 days on, maybe 2 days off or 3 days off. It's a little bit burdensome, and honestly, it's also a challenge to have those guys keep up with their continued professional education. It's tough for me to get them out to classes and keep their professional education up. It's all kind of combined, multi-layered.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Hold on, let me get back on my place here. Okay. So a couple of other items included in the budget is the elimination of the economic development consultant contract. So that'll save the city $66,000 a year. Henry Garcia informed me a couple months back that he will not be able to continue with the contract because of just other obligations. So, but I think it allows us an opportunity to do some of that more in-house, and I'm up for the challenge. So I look forward to that, and working with different businesses to help them get in, hopefully get them into the city of Calimesa. Under finance, a couple of items: increased audit services, and also shifting from the successor agency. Again, we just don't have enough revenue coming into that fund to fund it, so we had to shift those costs back. The property tax analytical services is related to a contract that the council recently approved with HDL. So we use them for sales tax. So a lot of that sales tax data that you saw that I presented is provided by them, and so they'll be able to provide the same information. And actually, that sales tax dollar, they provided that to me as well. So I can't take credit for that. So they provided all that information to me. Under fire, the wildland protection agreement that was recently approved by the council, the cost went up by 21,000 there. But I think we're probably gonna look at that more carefully. I don't know, maybe if the chief wants to add to that.
So the wildland protection agreement was about 131 the year previous, and it dropped last year to, I believe, 111,000. So it's gone down and up. I'm currently auditing all the metrics and doing a survey of other cities. I believe we're being overcharged in terms of the total acreage, and I'm questioning the boundaries for the 1 mile zone. So I'm sure council's heard before that, and is well aware that, we're in a high fire threat area. We're surrounded by what they call SRA, State Responsibility Area. Typically, there's a 1 mile boundary where the state of California protects their interest in the fire world, the term mutual threat zones. So that buffer zone is usually 1 mile from the edge of our city limits and extends outwardly. It appears that our metrics have it reduced to a half mile, which would appear to be an increase in acreage. My staff and I are working with the city manager's office. We're looking at that, and we're going to be prepared to make that argument going forward. I think there's either an oversight on their part, where we're getting charged too much, or perhaps other entities, other municipalities won't be too happy with me, but they're being not charged enough. I don't know which one, but I'm going to find out and report back.
Thank you.
And finally, I may put the lieutenant on the spot a little bit, but the budget also includes the addition of 8 flock cameras installed at various locations throughout the city. North part of town, at Calimesa Boulevard, down in the Summerwind area, and then also over on Tingleton Road. And Lieutenant, maybe if you can maybe just give a brief description on what these cameras do and what they are and what they do.
Well, the cameras are equipped with license plate, ALPR license plate readers. So, number one, they've solved and helped us solve a lot of cases, criminal investigations. But when, for instance, if there's any kind of crime where we already have a license plate for the suspect's vehicle, we can enter it into the flock system, and we get hits on them all the time from the cameras. They alert us on the computers and on our cell phones. We have an app, so we can have officers respond to those areas. So right now, I think like the number one thing that has significantly increased is the like recovery of stolen vehicles. I know is huge, but just overall, it's helping the deputies and investigators solve a lot of crimes.
But I have kind of a funny question. Do the cameras tell you if somebody hasn't registered their vehicle in a while?
I honestly don't know the answer to that. I sense that.
Oh, you
But
did?
no,
I'm sorry. I should have been a little bit more subtle there.
I don't believe they do, but I don't know for sure.
My understanding is they don't. They're not looking for those sorts of, activity. They're not looking for that.
That's just that issue of a little bit like Big Brother-ish, when you see those stupid TV shows where they can track somebody in LA and they know where they're at just by facial recognition and stupid stuff like that. So I'm sure there are ways to do that, but
We're not implementing, we're not considering that at this point.
So to add to that a little bit, for the cameras, I think, like you said, it's a phenomenal investigative tool that I've used quite a bit. So a lot of that database usually, I don't know exactly for Flock, I think maybe 30 days or so, and then it's kind of purged as far as how long the information is stored. But it's really just a database it puts plates into, and so it's very searchable. So it's very user-friendly as far as for law enforcement in general, just for investigative purposes. You can search by like a make, color of a car, if you have a partial license plate. So it just stores this information, and then that way you can come back if you're investigating any type of crime. So for us, like being on the freeway, I think it's great. So we have only so many like ins and outs. So you have cameras set up in strategic places, and a lot of stuff, it's burglaries or robberies, that type of thing, where it's probably coming from some other city, coming into our city, coming out. And then if you get just a little bit of information, like during these investigations where you have the color or make of a car or something, just little pieces of information in a time frame, and you can use this database, and there's a good chance you find some of these for these major crimes. It's very helpful. Plus, if you do have license plate, like Lieutenant mentioned, you're immediately notified if it comes into the city. If it's connected to a homicide or a robbery, or if it's a stolen vehicle, whatever the case is. So it gives a little added bonus there as well. So, and I don't think it checks your registration, but.
I do want to add that this is an annual cost because it's a subscription base. So there's a one-time cost for installation, and it's a minimal cost. But that cost is actually going to be accounted for in the supplemental law enforcement fund. So this is just the ongoing subscription for those 8 cameras. So they're $3,000 a piece per year. So that includes the storage, maintenance, things like that. So if something happens to a camera, they'll replace it, those kind of things. So it's nothing that we own as a city. We don't own the actual asset. It's just a subscription. So just wanted to point that out too. So here's a summary of everything I just talked about, and just kind of puts it all in one place for you to kind of see. And you have copies of the presentation, so you have that at your disposal. And then the other requests is a net amount of that last slide that we just saw. So the total comes out to just shy of $771,000. So I wanted to show the council how this kind of flows through. So here's the top is your original adopted fiscal year 22-23 budget, and then you remove out one-time expenditures and transfers out, and then net approved recurring mid-year items actually reduce the budget, and then proposed one-time expenditures, which you saw previously, proposed major recurring expenditures, which you saw recently. There's also some minor recurring charges that are just kind of sprinkled throughout all the different departments. That's a net negative of $66,475. Also, our cost allocation calculation, we had a little more costs that we're able to pass on to funds, and that gets you to your total of $9,266,699. And again, this is just another way of looking at the numbers. I just want to make sure that everyone learns a little differently, so I want to make sure we have different ways of looking at it. This is just another way of looking at all those costs. So that's that, and then just for information is the projected 22-23 numbers by department as well. And again, the fire department number, 5.3 million, that includes the ladder truck. That's why that number is so much higher than the previous year. The transfers out consist of that 2.2 million that we saw at the beginning consists of the following of all these numbers. The most significant of which is the transfer to capital projects. So we have several capital projects that are proposed out of the capital projects fund. So this is how we're funding it, including $1 million towards pavement management. The 5,000 and 85,000 there on the next two lines are similar transfers that we did in the current fiscal year, and then transfers of $750 and $193,900. That's not the amount we're spending out of those two funds. It's to establish a fund balance in those funds in addition to the purchases that we're proposing. And then again, just another way to look at our projected beginning and ending fund balances within the general fund. So I just want to talk about those new capital project or capital funds briefly. The new capital projects fund is currently used as the ARPA fund, and we're just going to repurpose that rather than create a new fund, because creating a new fund is always a challenge in finance, so we want to be able to repurpose if we can, and this is a good opportunity since after this ARPA goes away. So this will basically account for all capital projects that are not accounted for in any other special revenue fund. So it's very much a close tie to the general fund, but it gives us a discrete way to present capital expenditures, so that, and that's the same thing for both the vehicle replacement fund and the IT replacement fund as well. Really what we're trying to do is make the general fund our operating fund so that we can really be able to track expenditures on an operating basis from year to year, and then really distinguish those from capital expenditures on a year-to-year basis. So really when you think of the general fund, it's really important that you think of these four funds kind of working in tandem with one another to get the full picture. And that's kind of what I just said. So now let's move on to CIP. So in the budget, you'll notice that we have created a separate page for each capital improvement project, starting on page 161 of the packet, 147 of the budget document. And the presentation will refer to those pages, so if you want to look at the detail of the projects as we go through them, you'll be able to find that. There's 21 projects presented, 11 are carryover projects, 10 are new, although some of the new projects are just previously accounted for in the general fund. So we're basically, if they haven't had any money spent on those projects and we're carrying them forward, what we're doing is we eliminated them in the general fund and then reappropriating them in the new funds accordingly. The proposed investment over the next 5 years is just under $95 million, including $13.4 million in fiscal year 23-24. In addition to that, there is about $21.2 million in carryover funding as of 3/31. We will determine that final amount once the books close on 22-23. So we just basically took a point in time, looked at what the balances were, so that we have an idea of where those funds are. So again, this will probably be reduced because as we're still spending money on some of these projects, so we anticipate that number to be less at final carryover. And just a brief look at our expenditures by category and the funding sources for those projects. Obviously a very big focus on transportation. Those are related to pavement management, the county line road improvements, and all of our interchange projects. So we're going to start with carryover projects. I'm going to present the first two, and then I'm going to hand it over to Mike Thornton. So the library, we've already previously budgeted for that project. That project is ongoing. These are the different funding sources for that project. This is being done in partnership with the Riverside County Office of Economic Development, who will be paying for the lion's share of the project. So the $1.4 million presented here is only the city's portion of that project. Darlene, how much is the county's approximately? Right. So Any costs that are over and above what they had predicted will be on the county. So this is going to be our maximum contribution to the project. For 4th Street Park, staff is recommending that we add the funding for the park. The total cost is based on the full cost of the option 4 that had been previously presented to the council. So the current park development fee plus the Prop 68 grant was insufficient to meet that total amount. We had shared that with the council previously. So what I did was we put the additional $200,000 in future funding. So I'd like to remind the council, you're only approving the appropriation for 23-24. The rest of the years are just a planning tool. So the idea is to try to value engineer that to make sure that we either minimize that or eliminate that, or if we do get additional park diff fees, we'll be able to use that as part of the project cost as well. But just in full disclosure, if neither of those things happen, the general fund will need to pick up the difference, and that's looking at about $200,000 right now. And if we do come forward with a contract with that, we'll discuss it at that time. And if an appropriation is needed, an additional appropriation is needed to meet that full project budget, we'll come forward with that at that point. But we are asking to appropriate the park diff and the Prop 68 grant at this point. With that, I will hand it over to Mike. Mike, when you're ready to go to the next slide, just let me know.
Okay, thank you. So, good evening, council. We're going to go through these pretty fast, so if you have questions, go ahead. I think it's on green. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So, County Line Road, Calimesa Boulevard, this is what I affectionately refer to as the Jerry Lewis project. He did help us with some funding out of Safety Lou. Not sure that's the right spelling for safety, but
I checked it. That is, yeah.
Okay. All right, so we are looking at a $7.3 million budget. As you can see, there has been a portion that has been spent to date. We are currently working through the environmental process. In fact, it's done. And we have started right-of-way acquisition, as council is aware. And those 4 green, I'll call them slivers that are shown there, is the right-of-way acquisition that we need. We are partnering with the city of Yucaipa on this project. The 2 on the north side are in Yucaipa. The ones on the south side are in Calimesa. The funding sources beyond Safety Lou are the community project funding, street and traffic diff, and other governmental agencies. And what I meant by other governmental agencies is the city of Yucaipa. We plan to improve the intersection, as the bullet says there. Construction funding is pending. The mayor has helped us with a pitch to our Congress member. I think Will mentioned it at the last council meeting, that this project is on the list, Ken Calvert's list for funding, with priority number 2. So I think we're in pretty good shape. Next slide, please.
I'll just add real quick. We expect it would be part of the next fiscal years, the federal fiscal year, which starts on October 1st. They never meet that deadline ever, so they usually do pass a continuing appropriations bill, and typically, it's been coming in, November, December timeframe when they finally approve the federal budget. So that's what the time frame that we would find out if we got these funds for sure, is when the federal budget is signed. So once that happens, and if our project is indeed included, we would then come back to appropriate that money at that time.
So the Cherry Valley interchange, council is very, very familiar with this. It is a diverging diamond interchange for the public's benefit. It's what's been selected by Caltrans. It has a total budget of over $60 million. Much of that is construction funding that is to come. The funding sources, federal, WRCOG, and the WRCOG zone money, together with development contributions by way of WRCOG credit agreements, has helped us finance the project to this point. And we do have a CMAQ grant that continues to be held in reserve. It will be used for construction. We will completely reconstruct the interchange. The bridge that is there today will come down. and a new bridge will be constructed. And the configuration looks a little bit odd, but for the modeling that I think staff has showed council, you don't really see the other side of the road. You're kind of in a tunnel, so you don't know you're driving on the wrong side of the street for the public's benefit. We'll talk about Calimesa Boulevard realignment in a new project. We did apply for a funding through RCTC's latest call for projects, and it has been designated for funding, provided the board approves it in June. So we're going to encourage the board to do that. So, just a couple of quick updates that are not on the slide. Environmental is awaiting two steps, a DBESP approval from the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and a revision to the FTIP to get all the dates kind of lined up. We believe that both of those things will occur in July, and we will have our final environmental document approved. Just a sidebar in case council's hearing it from the public. There were some sound wall surveys recently distributed to the Rancho Calimesa Mobile Home Park, as well as Plantation on the Lakes. And the survey came back as everybody wants sound walls, at least along the freeway frontage at those two mobile home parks. How effective they are, I don't know, because they'll extend along the frontage, but noise can kind of go around the walls and still provide noise pollution to those residents. The step that we're really starting to gear up on is the plan specifications and estimates, and it is ongoing. Next slide, please. So this is a project that you haven't heard a lot about, but again, it will be a project that we will partner with the city of Yucaipa on. We are trying to see if the picture shows roundabouts. What I've learned in the Caltrans process through the Cherry Valley interchange is until we prove that they can work, they're not approved. And we did have them as an alternative at Cherry Valley, and they did not make it through the Caltrans process, and so I'm not 100% sure they will be used here. But those costs that we're presenting to you, the $6.2 million, is a roundabout alternative cost. The reason that it did not work at Cherry Valley was traffic. It could not accommodate the ultimate volumes. Cherry Valley has higher volumes than County Line ultimately, so perhaps they would work here, so there will be an alternative that we will consider, but the certainty of it is to be determined. Very similar funding sources. We have asked and have received budget amounts through WRCOG in the TUMP zone funding to help us fund our portion of the interchange processing with Caltrans. Understand too that our neighboring friend, other governmental agency, Yucaipa, would be responsible for their half. It will be a partial reconstruction. I wouldn't say complete reconstruction, because we're hoping that the bridge that goes over the County Line Road can remain, so we wouldn't have to reconstruct the bridge. If bridge reconstruction is involved, the $6.2 million will go significantly up, closer to that $60 million that we saw on Cherry Valley. So we've learned through the previous process that it'll probably take about 5 years to get from beginning to end. And so that's part of what we're showing in the last bullet. Next exhibit. So our citywide pavement rehab program. Don't know if you guys have driven any of the neighborhoods, but my understanding is that everything shown red, green on this exhibit is either done or very, very close to being done. I think they have some striping and things to do is what I've been advised, but everything else has been done there. The Sandalwood Crossing is awaiting a Caltrans encroachment permit before that work can be done. We're working with Caltrans to try to get that permit to finish the last component of this project, so it will be done very, very soon. Total cost as shown here is about $4.4 million. The funding source, as presented here, is ARPA, Measure A, and General Fund. Council did vote to put a significant portion of General Fund money into the project. And we will be returning to Council with additional streets, asking for consideration of other streets that need to be paved throughout the city. in the coming year. Next slide, please. And I'm sure Council's very aware of the County Line Road improvements, which we refer to as the LPP project. The reason we call it LPP is it was a significant portion of the funding. This is also a cooperative project with the city of Yucaipa. We are right now looking at about a $12 million project, $12.1 million. And as part of that $12.1 million, we anticipate that we will be done in late July. Keep our fingers crossed that we can get there. When our contractor leaves, South Mesa Water Company's contractor will move in. And they will be building some water lines through the reaches that we have just constructed some roundabouts in. And when they're done, we will bring likely another contractor, or bring our contractor back for what's referred to as final paving, where everything would be done at that point. So, as I said, the funding sources are a patchwork quilt of funding. As you can see there, it goes from AB 2766, RMRA, LPP, MSRC, developer contributions, Yucaipa, as well as street and traffic DIF and Measure A. Lots of different sources. Roundabouts will be coming soon. We think by October of 24, everything along the corridor will be done. You don't want to wait. Thank you. So, Singleton Interchange. That is moving along. Again, this project is the two missing ramps that don't exist today to get those two in as a phase one of the project. We've estimated around $3.5 million. As shown here, we do have some funding identified through WRCOG zone. The funding sources include a significant contribution from the Oak Valley Town Center development. We anticipate that the costs may change over time because of what will ultimately be approved by Caltrans as the improvements. We are looking at different alternatives, but we got some very good news just before the meeting today. FHWA appears to be supporting just installing the two missing ramps with traffic signals associated at the end of the ramps. So we are hoping that with that scope, we will make our budget work. There is another project that we're going to get to as part of our new projects. It is closely related. This is a project that's been on our books a long, long time. We are getting closer every day. We sent our environmental document out for review. The period closed last Monday. We got a lot of comments from Fish and Wildlife and federal Fish and Wildlife too. They call them Fish and Wildlife. I used to call them Fish and Game. I guess you're not allowed to call them that anymore. So we're going to have to work through those comments. It is not completely funded because our costs have gone up. The previously approved funding is around $9 million. We anticipate that that will have to increase. We'll be talking to our funding partner, Riverside County Flood Control, to help us there. We have spent the EPA grant that helped us with the money that's been expended to date, and the city storm drain fund will also help fund it. Next slide, please. So the new projects, I've kind of alluded to them already. This one is right next to the Singleton Interchange. It's the realignment of Calimesa Boulevard to provide space between the interchange and the intersection of Calimesa Boulevard and Singleton. We're looking at a $3.2 million budget as laid out. $1 million in funding for 23-24, and future years is $2 million. We were very successful at our last zone meeting and added a couple of $1 million of top zone funding to the project, and developer contribution will backfill the rest of it, so that's how it will be fully funded. Next slide, please. Calimesa Boulevard realignment. So we talked about Cherry Valley a minute ago. And we've been, I'm going to say selected, although it's not official. We've been selected for a grant So what we're going to do is split that realignment away from the interchange project and build it up front. In doing so, we don't need Caltrans permits because we'll be outside the Caltrans right-of-way, and we'll do that as a local CIP project that will help reduce the cost of the overall interchange and the ask from our federal representative. The challenge of the Calimesa Boulevard realignment is that is the significant right-of-way acquisition component of the project. It goes right through lots rather than strips along Cherry Valley that we would need to widen the roadway. A little easier to get those when you go right through the middle of a site. It's a little harder to get. But what we're pursuing is just the right-of-way that we need to realign the roadway. The remaining portions will remain. As shown here, I think I've already covered the other two bullets, so I'll move on. This is the final project. I'm going to throw it back to Will. The Sandalwood Drive interchange. We got a very, very nice compliment from FHWA today, we heard. They said Calimesa is a small city and they're taking on all these huge projects. Wow. And I thought that was a nice compliment to hear. So this is another one primarily driven by development of the Mesa Verde project. We're estimating this at about $6.2 million, of which some is funded for this coming year, but the lion's share of it will be in future years. As it says here, primarily development contributions, basically the only one that's been identified to date. We'll have to go through the PSR, PA&ED, and PS&E steps, and we anticipate, because of our experience with Cherry Valley, that will encumber about 5 years. With that, I'm going to throw it back to Will. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Couple other projects to highlight here. The Senior Center ADA improvements, Phase 2, is included as a CIP project in the document. However, there's no funding being requested at this point. Typically, what we've done with these projects is we go out to bid, we get the bids back, and then appropriate money at the same time as awarding the contract. These are funded by CDBG funds. So we do have a small contribution. That $5,000 contribution from the general fund also goes towards this project and will be appropriated at that point as well. Several facility improvements that we're proposing, both of which, or at least I think is both in the current CIP or current budget, or just the flooring, Celeste?
The roof replacement.
Yeah.
It's just the
Okay. So the flooring it was originally called carpeting, but after committee feedback, we changed that to flooring. So I thought that was actually a good suggestion. So gives us a little more flexibility of flooring options we can look at. So that's for $40,000, and that will do both the city hall and the planning annex, and that will take place after the releveling, which the council just approved. So we'll get that project done probably before the end of the fiscal year, and then that will pave the way to be able to do the flooring project. We're also proposing roof replacements for the City Hall, Senior Center, and Fire Department. Those costs are broken down in the budget document of what each one costs. The total cost is $135,000. And then a future year's project we have is to renovate the Senior Center bathrooms, because they're basically both in their original state from the construction of this building in the late 80s. So it actually predates the city. Under vehicles and equipment, we're proposing 3 new vehicles. One, with the addition of the 3rd BC, we'd add a command vehicle, but what we would do with that, at a full disclosure, is the current chief's vehicle would become the battalion chief's vehicle, and we would outfit the new vehicle for the chief's specifications. The second is a utility vehicle. It would replace the COP Ford Explorer. As a 2001 model, not in very good condition, not very much utilized, but we do, obviously, being in a rural area with a lot of undeveloped land, we do have quite the occasion as staff to have to go out to those areas. So this utility vehicle would be a 4x4 for us to be able to access that. There's been a couple of times that Kelly and I have gone out in the field, and we've had to hitch rides with other people, to be able to get to those areas because my Fusion wouldn't quite cut it. So, and then the third vehicle is a skid steer. So this is not just vehicles, but also equipment. It would replace our current backhoe, which is out of AQMD compliance. So we would surplus the backhoe, and this would probably be able to cover about 95% of our projects that we use it for. And the occasion that we would need a backhoe, we would probably just rent it. So it's a much more cost-effective piece of equipment, and it's probably more useful for the city. So that is our recommendation for that. Finally, on information technology, these cover 3 different projects over desktops and laptops, server back infrastructure, and then other IT infrastructure. So the total cost there is about $68,000 and change for, or a little bit less than that, about $45,000 or so for various replacements. So 9 would be desktop replacements of current desktops. The 2 new staff that are being proposed would need a new one, and then we're also proposing to add an additional laptop. The server would be a replacement of a current server. The online solar application, that is related to a grant. I think I left a dollar sign off. I think that's supposed to be $30,000, not $3,000. So I apologize for that. But we did get a grant for this through the state for that piece. So in conclusion, here's just a list of all the funds for you to read at your leisure or at your bedside before bed if you need help going to sleep. But I will say that we have separated out our transfers in and out from expenditures. So those are shown in a separate column just for disclosure's sake. And then obviously when you have transfers in and out, they should balance out to 0. In this case, they do. So most of the transfers are out from the general fund to various other funds, but then there are several that are inter-fund transfers in other places as well. But as you can see, our change in our overall city fund balances is about a net change of about $50,000. So we're basically living within our means, which is a good sign. So I talked about how the reserves kind of change a little bit with the addition of those funds. So we bring those 3 funds into the fold here, and you get down to so our actual total reserves is $7.3 million. Now you'll notice that we added a line for reserve for parks and trails. So this is a request by the Finance Committee to set aside some of those unreserved fund balances to start a reserve for parks and trails. And I don't know if the committee members would like to chime in on that request.
So the idea for the reserve for the parks and trails was to, well, there was a number of reasons for this. Number 1 was to tell the public that we hear them. And when I'm talking to my neighbors, when I'm talking to people in our community, it's clear that residents value parks, they value trails, they value our open spaces, and they want the city to put some funds there to show that we also value that, and to start investing in trail development and construction, and to start hopefully setting funds aside to invest in future parks and current parks. And so that's the main idea, is to tell our residents that we hear them, but also our general plan speaks to our city's commitment to parks and trails, and as a important goal of our community. And so we wanted to begin to, the idea is to begin to invest monetarily into those values that we say that are important to us. And so that $75,000 is a first step in that direction, and is greatly appreciated by Finance Committee, but also I know it will be by our residents. But I'd like to hear what other council members have to say, if they think that it's a good use of funds.
I don't think you'll find anybody to argue with you.
Thank you, Mayor.
I can,
Because I'm ready for one now.
I can argue with you. Well, typically, we have the developments come in and put money into that. So that's just a thought. I know that a lot of times that's wrapped up in developing an area. They have to have so many parks, and you know, but I think it's good that they're trying to preserve the trails and stuff
Yeah.
too.
We can get those Michaels that you work with to allow us to use the property, put some trails on it that are marked.
Yeah. Yeah, well, let's do that. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's,
I think we'd all appreciate that.
like that whole organization.
Well, yeah. They talk out of both sides of their mouth when it comes to that. Yeah,
And they don't want you to walk on it.
right.
I'll just add,
It would be
Jeff,
nice, yeah.
I like the idea, I like the concept of it. As we've seen, the parks are very, very expensive. So, I mean, I appreciate the focus on it as far as from the development side. So without the development, you know, there's no way we would have had that amount of those funds to put in that direction. So
Right.
you see it's going to be like a long road to
Sure.
throw a few pennies in there as we move along. But I like the idea, and hopefully we can,
Yeah.
over time, you know, add a little to it, and hopefully, mostly, I think, focus on through development and try to get some of these bigger things done just because of the overall cost is so large. But yeah, I like the idea. Thanks.
Yeah, we're not gonna be able to buy a lot of property with that amount of money as it is, but that's not the goal right now. I think one, we can begin to charge our parks, trails, community service commissioners with ways that we could use these funds to develop trails, to mark our trails, to for signage, and just to invest in our community in that way. And it's a first step. And I hope, you know, that this line item will continue in years to come, and we can build on it. And so I thank you, City Manager, for listening, and to not just me, but to the residents as well.
Thank you. So, you know, in continuing the conclusion, you know, we wanted to make sure that the budget strikes upon each of the 5 priorities set in our strategic plan, and we believe that that this budget does do that. So, under quality of life, the addition of the funds to fund the 4th Street Park Phase 2, additional fire personnel, flock cameras for public safety. Under economic development, you know, being able to work closer with Kelly in planning to marry that with economic development, use our property tax analytics to our advantage, infrastructure improvements you see there, community engagement with our land use workshop, that was huge. I started the podcast, that link will be up shortly. Actually, it's already on the website, but we'll do it on our social media as well. State of the City, the budget adds $6,000 to the State of the City budget for a new concept that we're thinking about to hopefully bring the community more to it. Typically, it's been kind of a sit-down lunch with the Chamber of Commerce, and we realize it's a fundraiser for the Chamber of Commerce, so we're working closely with them, which is why we're proposing to put more money towards it so that it can offset more of their costs for it, and then also they can bring in booths and stuff like that, like they do for their boutiques, to make some money that way. We've been working with them. They're excited about the concept. Our tentative date for that right now is October 7th, and it's a Saturday, to make sure that the community can participate. We're going to be trying to work with Mesa View Middle School to have it hosted there as an outdoor event. And so instead of doing like a formal State of the City speech, we're thinking of having booths for each department and talk about their accomplishments throughout the year and highlight the things that they do for the community, and just be something that we can really connect with the community on. So it's a little bit of a different concept for State of the City. I think the city of Menifee did something similar a few years back, and they said it was very successful there. So just, you know, something different out of the ordinary that we just wanted to try. And so Darlene and I have been working on that to try to make that happen. So again, October 7th is the tentative date for that. The balanced budget under financial stability, again, it does not only give us enough buffer to weather some downturns in the economy, but we also, our numbers are conservative, and so we want to make sure we set targets that are achievable, and that we can even beat, both on the revenue side and on the expenditure side. And then on top of that, we have our very well-funded reserves, 79% of all general fund expenses, 82% of recurring expenditures. And so adding the staff for the addition of the senior account, I think adds to that that goal as well. And we continue to be a very fiscally healthy city. Remember, we were ranked #1 in fiscal year 2020, ranked #5 in 2021 out of all cities in the entire state. That's over 450 cities. So something that the council should be very, very proud of. Some things for future consideration. There were multiple requests from staff that were not included in the budget relating to equity adjustments. And, you know, the staff, I certainly value the staff very much. And, of course, you know, we want to be able to compensate them as much as we can. But it's hard to do it within just a kind of a vacuum, right? And so there's this concept of a class and comp study has been discussed on and off over the last few years. So rather than doing them off like market adjustments for specific positions, a better approach would be to do it on a holistic basis, right? So the budget does not include the cost of that, but it's just something for the council to consider in the future, and maybe that can be a topic of future discussion. So that's just something to keep in mind, and the cost of that is about $40,000 to $50,000, so that's a one-time cost, obviously. Refinement of the reserve policy. We have a very solid reserve policy at 30% of expenditures plus 5% for vehicle reserves. With these additional funds that we're adding, one of the things I'd like to do is just to go back and add to that, and maybe even address some other reserves, like the Parks and Trails Reserve that we just created, or proposing to create. And so that might be something to kind of envelop into this, to try to set like some goals of what do we do with one-time revenues that come in? What do we do with when we come in under budget? You know, we have that excess money. What do we do with that money? How do we, give staff direction on where those reserves should be filled? So that's something to look at in the future as well, and that's something that I will work on probably in the summer and fall, and then bring back some recommendations for the council. The budget calendar, Celeste and I have talked about this. We're going to start internally, maybe looking at things sooner, especially with the CIP process. Obviously, we've made some changes to it, so we want to give staff sufficient time, because obviously the budget is something they do in addition to their normal duties, even on the finance side. So, if we can spread some of that out more, I think that we can make sure we're thorough in that endeavor, and it's not too burdensome all at once when we're doing the budget process. And then finally, continuing planning for growth, right? We talked about some of that already with succession planning. Adding these positions does do some aspects of that. Obviously, continuing to make sure we're adequately staffed for our safety resources. We obviously have heard from the community about their priorities on that, so that's going to be a continued priority going forward. And again, like I said, we have limited opportunity to add staff, so obviously as part of one of our new developments, we do have space set aside for a new city hall, and that's one of the reasons that's important, so that we can grow as a city, grow as a staff, as our city grows, to be able to continue to provide those services. In addition, we're going to have to add eventually a Parks and Recreation component. We don't have that right now. We're looking at some options to serve that in the interim. But eventually, as we grow, we're going to have to bring that in-house, and so that'll also require additional staff, which we wouldn't be able to house right now, right? So we want to make sure that we are growing at an adequate pace. Finally, I'd like to make some acknowledgments. First, to our Finance Committee, thank you for your diligence in reviewing the budget, and your recommendations and your feedback were very helpful in putting this presentation together, so we appreciate it. Of course, Celeste has done an excellent job with this budget. Again, being a finance department of 2, it's an additional duty, right? It's part of her duties, but it's it's almost one of those things you have to do in addition to all the day-to-day things, you know, that she does. So I appreciate, you know, Celeste, you putting everything together and doing putting all this document together and all these different numbers. It takes a lot of work, so I appreciate that. The look and feel of the document is due to Alana, who actually, her bachelor's degree is in fine art and graphics design, and it shows with this document. So this is a really nice looking document. She's made some really great changes to the look and feel of it. So Alana, thank you so much. Great job on that. All the department heads, you guys work so hard, and I appreciate the time and effort you put into the budget in addition to the day-to-day. Our entire staff, you know, I'm coming up on 6 months, and this has been an amazing staff to work with, and just the multiple talent that we have in the staff, we're really lucky. So that we can get as much done as we can with the small amount of people, but I mean, we're small but mighty, and I can't appreciate all of you enough. Bonnie and Delu, Bonnie, thank you for your review, and also for the past 8 years, 9 years that you've put into the budgets previously to this. Being able to present the budget and having such a healthy fiscal outlook is a large part to your effort. So thank you so much for setting this up so well for me. So I really appreciate it. And she did review a lot of this too, and went through and ticking and tying, and her auditor's eye is still as sharp as you know, as it probably was in her first day of auditing. So thank you for that. And Delu did also review that, so we thank them. And our admin assistants for putting together all these packets. They are the unsung heroes sometimes in this, so I appreciate their help as well. So the next steps is we've had a lot of direction provided. If you have any additional direction, we're happy to take that. Any changes that we have discussed, we will incorporate into the June 5th presentation for the budget. It will not be to this detail. It'll be very high level for the budget adoption, and then we will bring that forward to the June 5th meeting for formal adoption. That concludes. I appreciate the attention, the questions. I know this is a lot of information. I know this is a lot of time, and so I definitely appreciate your time and attention for this. This is a big deal for staff, and it's a big deal for the city. So I definitely appreciate your attention on this. So, and all of our staff is here to answer any additional questions that you may have. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Zaitz, did you want to step in someplace? Is that on?
Hello?
There you
Maybe
go.
I should just speak a little bit closer to it. Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor, City Council, city officials. Some of the residents of Summer Winds community have a budget request to increase safety, add security cameras at the Summer Wind Park, and add additional officers. The proposed 23-24 budget contains an appropriation of $6,000 for security cameras for the 4th Street Park. We ask the same for the Summer Winds Park. There are safety concerns about the park. It is feared that the problems being experienced at the nearby easement, Edison easement, and the public trail that runs through the development will mitigate to the park. As such, we think, in all fairness, that security cameras should also be placed at that park. Earlier today, a resident of Summer Winds emailed to City Council their concerns about security and safety at the Summer Winds project. They noted that in one cul-de-sac with 6 houses on it, 3 houses experienced crime within the first 2 months of moving in, and law enforcement response times they believed were very high. One example, someone approached a house, cut the power, and the residents didn't know if the perpetrator was coming into the house. The sheriff took over 15 minutes to arrive. Someone could have been badly injured or killed. They believe the city needs to allocate more money toward public safety as they have more than they have in the past. My research finds that in a 2019 DOJ study, they state that cities in the western U.S. with populations between 10,000 and 25,000 have an average police officer ratio of 1.4 officers per 1,000. Based on that ratio, one would expect for a city of 10,000 to have 14 officers. The city of Calimesa, according to the city manager, has approximately 6 full-time patrol officers, well under the 14 average expressed by the DOJ. The other personnel that the city manager discussed appear to be management and administrative officials. When you add those in, it becomes 11, still under 14, but I think you need to compare the patrol officers' numbers. So we would, because of those security concerns, safety concerns, I would like to, one, ask City Council increase the budget to provide cameras at the Summer Winds Park as it has done for, as it will be doing for the 4th Street project, and also contemplating increasing a patrol presence.
Do we have anything else to offer here? Or are we done? Can I go eat?
I just want to say thank you, staff. You guys did a great job. It's a lot of time and effort that goes into all this, a lot of numbers. So thank you.
I'd like to comment too. I think it really showcases the staff, the level of the staff that we have in these documents, because it was in great detail, it was understandable, and it makes our job easier. So thank you. Thank you for all the time you put into the work that you do for the city. It shows the love you have for the city. Thank you.
I think you all should remember that this is something that has been built over many years, and it's far cry from what we used to have. And because of, well, you don't even have a clue from what we used to have. Yeah, that's why they left. But I really want to thank the staff and Celeste, but it's a product of everybody here as far as what you guys have done, and I thank you. And we'll have to look into Mr. Yates's problems and community. Yeah. With that, I'm going to say let's go on until the next council meeting. We're done.